go ahead and get started. Today is Monday, August the 26th, 2019. The time is now 5 p.m. The work session of the City Council will now come to order. We have, looks like, 4 particular items and one of the possible new items after that we might identify. Item number 1 is the Trinidad Animal Shelter. And there is some concern and discussion about the possibility of lack of available funding for being able to finish the animal shelter, which was something that was agreed upon early on, and we need to probably have a good discussion on it. So I'm not sure, we need some of you members to come forward.
I'm Laurel, Executive Director for Laurel Young. Fletcher. Yeah, Fletcher just found number 1.
As Executive Director, why don't you go ahead and give us your take as to what's happening?
In regards to the city shelter building.
Yes. That's what we're here for discussion.
Well, there's tremendous progress going on there.
I do see that.
Have been able to see that, and I think I should have the roof up on there. The interior is a concern, though. It seems that the city will own the building, from my understanding. Yet Noah's Ark is tasked with completing the interior in its entirety, including all electrical and flooring, and or at least that's what's kind of presented. And Noah's Ark's kind of concerned because it's a pretty large task, especially for a building that we won't own. We do have funds that are available. We are doing actively fundraising through various methods, and we've investigated quite a bit of grants, DOLA and USDA and a few private foundations as well. Some of the hiccups that we keep running across, though, is that Noah's Ark's now going to own the building.
So why couldn't we lease it to long term? 50 years.
Grants don't want
For what though?
They want the owner.
In order for like a DOLA grant to be written, or a USDA grant, or even the majority of the grants to be written, Noah's Ark would have to own the building, or the city could apply. Because they're the owners of the building, which is ideal, I think. And there are organizations, private foundations that could help with equipment and different things like that. But as far as construction and retrofitting the basics.
This wasn't discussed way beforehand, before we turned a couple of them?
Yeah, when another board was there, another director.
Yeah, and I believe that, my guess is that they weren't aware of how the majority of these grants work, and that if Noah's Ark were to lease the building, that it would be a lot more difficult for Noah's Ark to just write the grant on our behalf, because they're not the custodians of the building, they don't own the building. So the city would need to apply for the building if they're going to be owners. So that's a conundrum, and that's something that we've investigated and keep.
What I understand is there was if not an agreement, as perhaps there should have been, there was at least a mutual understanding that together this thing would be fully funded, from turning dirt to accepting animals, correct?
When the other board
Yeah,
was
you
there.
told me that, I got that twice. Okay, but somehow or another, when the board changed and the administration changed, the thinking about this all changed as well. And now it's more that, I don't know so much as it's you can't or you won't.
Oh, we will, and we're trying. These are the obstacles that we're running into, is that Noah's Ark doesn't own the building, so we're having a harder time getting larger quantity grants
Okay,
because of that. And that's what I'm saying, this is the conundrum. We have funds, we are trying, we're doing everything that we can, but because we don't own the building, we can't really apply for these grants. It's a problem that we keep running into.
And I'm afraid previous to us, they didn't look into the specifics of what all this was going to cost.
Right.
And they figured maybe like we did at the beginning, we can go to DOLA or we can go to USDA.
With the shell.
Yeah, no, for the ins- oh, I'm
Answer
sorry.
his question.
For they, to complete the building with the rest of the construction. DOLA has answered, Greg inquired for us. Number one, that grant would have to come from the city, not us, okay? And number two,
Yeah,
DOLA told them they're mostly people
I have an
funding.
alternative on the lease. And I'm just throwing this out there, nobody's talked about it, people may throw pieces of paper at me. But why don't we give them the shell and give them a ground lease on the property? Then you own the building and you can get your grants. And it doesn't have to be a city-owned building anymore because you have a ground
At
lease.
least,
So what's wrong with that?
I'll turn that to Greg.
Well, from what I've seen, like USDA is not an option because
Of the
they
population.
do not, well, no, that was
No.
Petco. But USDA was not going to fund any construction of the building. They would do
Equipment, trucks and vans, and things like
yeah,
that.
so that's not gonna help construct the
Plus
building.
with the direct loan from USDA,
But a
that-
loan doesn't help us.
no, that would have to go to a bond that we have to be voted on, and
Right.
that's no good. Yeah.
And then the thing like the Petco or those animal ones, I think they expect volume that Denver can do. They don't expect volume of a rural community.
Well, we're not super giant, but, you know, we can easily, you know, pull in 1,800 animals a year.
Minimum was 2,500 on the application.
And Petco's been good to us,
Petco's great. We also have
with
some,
dog food and stuff like that.
some allies with AAF, which we, you know, Noah's Ark has worked with in the past, and we've spoken with, and they are very open to working with us. But again, it becomes an issue of the building and who owns the building, and is it feasible for Noah's Ark to own a building? And, you know, if we did that, we might have to increase our cost for our services, you know, and so we have to look at that impact as well.
My question is this, we gave it $400,000 for this shelter, right? The city gave.
I believe the city set
Well,
aside $400,000 for the city shelter.
$400,000 for the
And then
city.
Jay Chimino gave 100 for them.
So we got $500,000 we're talking about already. And you're talking about the infrastructure inside the building as far as electrical and stuff like that.
We're talking about rural.
What I see from what was going on, what's going on, all I see is, cinder block walls and a roof and some trusses being put up. Now to me, a $400,000 $500,000 building, that's quite a lot of money for cinder block walls and just the roofing going up.
I agree.
So what I'm asking is, you know, where does this money go to? I mean, you're talking about finishing all the inside and stuff, and we already arranged with all this kind of money. Where's it going to? I mean, you're talking $500,000 for a dog shelter.
I'm afraid that I don't have those numbers because it's not that
Well, you're
portion
the
of it is not.
director, sweetheart, aren't
But
you?
I think,
It's
But
not
the
our
city's
problem.
constructing.
It's that the
The
city
city.
constructed it.
We have no control over that.
I think that probably Mr. Beach,
Huh?
would you have any answers to that?
Oh, yes, certainly. The block building that you're seeing is just the
Frame.
the shell, yeah, the frame, yeah, thank you. There's still a 3-clear stucco system going on the outside, there's metal roofing, there's metal
Yes.
soffits, there's quite a bit more to go to.
That's gonna cost that much
And
money.
windows.
Oh, yes.
And we had to remove the swimming pool or a big chunk of it.
Yeah.
Right,
Build
and
the
then there was
foundation.
the architects, and he's there for all the drafting. There was modifications, the building actually shrunk, so, you know, I give huge kudos to the Trinidad team because they really found ways to bring the cost down tremendously.
When we first bid it for the building that's going up right now, when we first bid it, it was close to $900,000.
I remember that.
Just for the shell.
I have a question for you. Originally, you all, from previous boards and directors, had a piece of property on Santa Fe Trail that was going to be a site for an animal shelter. And that didn't come to fruition because of lack of foresight on the previous board and executive director for the cost it was going to come to. And that idea got scrapped after a lot of planning and zoning commission meetings, etc. Is that piece of property something that you have tried to, the board has been willing to sell in order to pay for this?
It's currently
It's on the market.
It's got a sign posted on it.
It does?
I can kind of answer some of your questions because I don't know where the $400,000 mark came in. It was prior to me being on council and after I was the president of the board of Noah's Ark. Well, what happened is, and we did due diligence with that piece of property.
I remember.
Okay, it all started because Mr. Sawaya donated that property.
Correct.
So what we did is we spent our own money for a feasibility study to figure out what kind of building we can put up there, how much it would cost us for maintenance and upkeep of that building. And after the study, and it's something similar to what the hospital did with their fundraiser for the hospital.
Mhm.
Okay, so what we discovered was the city, as individual citizens, would not contribute the amount of money we needed to complete that. And at that point, that building was up to $1.25 million.
I remember that.
Okay.
And that's why you had to walk away
So,
from it.
that was one reason. The second reason was because the residents of that area were so adamant against that shelter being there that we decided, rather than have conflict throughout the operation of the shelter, we scrap it. It was our intent at that point to stay where we were at. We had no intention of going anyplace. The state, whatever the regulatory agency is of the state that allows us to work out of the place that we're at, said, knowing the needs of the community and knowing what Noah's Ark was doing for the feral cat project, the stray animals, and all that stuff, allowed us to maintain there and stay there as long as we could figure out how to make that money. Luckily for us, we had a lady from Los Angeles, believe it or not, that gave us pretty close to $250,000. It's in a restricted fund, and it's to be used for this building of a new shelter, period.
Okay.
What caused the fly in the ointment, so to speak, is the building was sold. So now, what does Noah's Ark do? We had 1 year, I personally talked to Mr. Chimino, because at that point I was the president of the board, and I asked him, I said, you would put a huge stress on the shelter if you're gonna make us leave. That was at 1 year, and I think that we're going on almost maybe 3 years now. But
Right.
he's allowed us to operate on property he owns. In addition to that, he gave the city that money, and the city gave that money to help
The
with the
construction
shelter.
effort.
So that's why we sit where we sit. The problem is between when I was on board and the new board, we don't know who came up with that $400,000.
I did.
You did?
Originally. Because we asked an architect what would it cost to construct the shell. And he assured us that he could do it for $300,000.
So that's why we're in the corundum.
Okay, Karen, you mentioned that someone had donated some money that's in an account.
It's in a restricted fund, and I'm sure it still is, right?
It is,
Yeah.
and that is money to be used
And how
for
much is there?
construction. There's a building fund account which has got $180,000, and then there's some set aside about approximately $200,000 there as well that can be drawn.
So you have
That could
almost
be used.
$400,000.
So that could be used for the
No, that's
construction?
$300,000.
You said 200 and 180?
Well,
Almost
yeah, but
400?
Yeah, some of that needs to be held back for reserve though, just a little bit, and it hasn't been designated as such. But yes, we've got quite a bit there, and we want to move forward with it. Definitely. And that money is earmarked for a new shelter and for building. But, we've got to do it.
Okay, so the thing is that, is that money separate from the money you have set aside yourself? Because you said that there is some money that you guys have set aside.
We have a restricted account, and then we have a building fund account.
And how much is your building fund account?
It's $180,000 approximately.
That's that's in this restricted fund that you're talking about.
That's just for the building fund. That's money, the building fund is money that people have given
It's like 430.
since day one of Noah's Ark to build a new shelter.
Mhm.
Since day one, it's being collected in there. There's grant donations. And then the sales of those properties is around $200,000, and that's sitting in a restricted account.
And
Yeah.
where's the donation?
Excuse me?
The donation from the lady in California?
Yeah.
That's from that.
Yeah.
You said it was $250,000, $250,000?
Total
It was, I,
430.
that's what we sold the houses for, and then we had to pay closing costs, and we had to pay realtor fees. So it might have netted out close to two.
So the available funds that you have are $430,000?
Yes, and you can actually,
380.
380.
yeah, 380.
Wait.
And we provided
Wait,
a
where'd
copy
you get
of,
430?
Well, that
I
was
heard
before,
250 plus 180.
right, but that didn't include the fees for
So
selling
it
the
came down to
property.
200.
So you
The
had
real
real
estate, we had to
fees,
pay
wow,
commission to the realtor
50,000.
and the
quarter
closing
million.
costs.
So that property has been sold up there?
I thought
No,
you said
No,
it's
no,
just-
no.
These are from
these
other
were-
sales.
Okay.
These were
Oh.
two separate.
We're
And I-
we're
and
getting,
I-
we're getting a lot of things crossed over here, and we're very, I mean, we're all over the place, and I think what we need is we need something in writing that shows what all the possibilities are, what kind of funding you have
right,
available
and
to
I would
yourself.
let,
Oh, excuse me, 1 second. What kind of funding you have available to yourself, whether it's through funding that Noah's Ark actually owns, any restricted funds, the property that is for sale, the potential value of that property, and have you had any leads on it at this point in time? And I think before we can even move forward with a request of what I think you're actually coming to the city for is to see if we can help fund this. I think we need to have that information in front of us before we can even have
Sure.
a set of solid
and I do
discussion.
want you all to know that there are copies of our financials downstairs, as well as the audit that was performed in 2017. Those have been provided, and I have no problems providing those.
Well, I think financials are fine, but I think just a simple list of all of the funding capabilities that you have right now, and I mean, could be a 5-point part of it.
Well,
right?
and Deb, what is the listing for the property? How much is that?
It's listed at 160, it was appraised at 120,
And that would be used towards the
Three or
new
four
shelter
years
as well.
Now, I'm hearing a couple of things, and I'm not sure I got an answer to why the ground lease with the donation of the building doesn't work. When you started out, you said that you have available grant sources and perhaps philanthropic sources, but the problem is it's gonna be a lot easier if you own the building. And when I said to Greg, why can't we just do that structure? And you started basically saying there are no grants. So can we come together on that a little bit?
Hey, tell me about,
I mean, I have a memo here which basically says it's not gonna happen. And you're saying that you have a lot of avenues that,
well, we've got one specific that I know of that they're eager to help us with. However, you know, there's always the caveat that we either have to have a long-term lease, you know, we're gonna
I
have to
don't
own
see
the
any
building.
problem with that.
I'm not familiar with the ground lease, I don't know
Yeah,
how
it
that
just
works.
means, it just means.
An
that
MOU or some sort.
You
don't
can
own the
put
land.
things, yeah, you can't put your stuff on other people's land. But you can put your stuff on land that you lease from the city. So you could own the building. We were not gonna give you the land, we'll lease you the land on a favorable basis. And then you have your building, a privately owned building on what was once city property. And then, I guess I wanna sort out, can you fill the gap then? Does that allow you to fill the gap, that structure?
It could possibly.
But what happens if Noah's Ark owns the building and Noah's Ark board dissolves and goes back to the city, then what?
No.
It doesn't go
it
back
doesn't
to the
go back
city,
to the
that's
city.
the problem.
Maybe,
So
well,
then
that
we
might
would
be that might be the issue though, which is that, we have a right to purchase it for a nominal sum should you stop performing the services. I mean, that's fixable.
Right.
The feasibility study that was performed, I believe it says that a building, I think it's a little bit bigger than this 6,000 square foot, that Noah's Ark wouldn't be able to solely maintain that full function, including all the upkeep and everything. So that's,
Well,
please
the city's
understand,
not doing that either.
I'm
so-
glad I could come to you guys and like bounce these ideas off of you,
Right.
and we could all put our heads
But we're
together.
finding problems, I mean, that's a problem that exists whether the city owns it or you are.
Correct. So what would
So-
happen, like, if that were, let's say 3 years from now, if Noah's Ark runs out of, you know, our little thrift store just can't produce enough, and, you know, Noah's Ark can't pay taxes on the building or insurance on the building, then.
Well, then I suppose the city would either give you money or relieve you of the building.
And then it would fall back, the animal care services would fall back to the city.
I suppose that would be part of the criteria for deciding what to do.
Would the city of Trinidad be interested in just doing a basic rough out of the building, similar to what maybe, I believe, Mr. Eisman did with the Galleria building, with just basics, not even walls or
I
finishes
have to
or anything
repeat
like
what Phil
that?
said. You're asking us to do something without a good college try here, which is you started out saying, we would be able to raise the money except for the complications of ownership, okay? And now I'm hearing, well, maybe you're less confident, and would the city, I have to go back to Phil's comments, which is, we gotta see sources and uses, and we have to understand that you've exhausted all possibilities, because it was very controversial to spend $400,000 on that building. You know, there are a lot of dog lovers and cat lovers in this town, but there are a lot that would rather see the money go to something else.
I think you're gonna need to go back and do some due diligence on numbers and possibilities, and, you know, you mentioned that there may be, you know, a couple of organizations out there that might be able to help you, and you need to know what those numbers are from them, and get those all written down for us, so that we can get a clear understanding of what they all are.
AAF would do at max $100,000, and that would be it.
And that's fine, I mean,
And that
all
would
those,
only be for equipment.
and that's fine, but we need to have all those, you need to look at.
I
the
can do a
entire-
printout for you,
You
that's
need to look at the
absolutely
entire
fine.
project, as
That'd
to
be
what
good.
it's gonna cost you for finishing up the building and any equipment that is needed to go into the building, those are all.
We do have the
Mhm.
opinion of probable cost that was presented by HDF Architects as well. I don't know if this would be helpful, I do have a copy for you, if you would like. I can present that to you. This is for the cost of everything, for the shelter, interior, exterior, the whole 9 yards, it's all in here.
Do you have that number?
Yeah. The original was 2.3, and then the 6% difference, because the shelter did shrink in size, would be 1.2 total. That's for everything, and that is priced at its highest, which Noah's Ark is not interested in doing things with granite, or, we're not talking the Taj Mahal here, okay? But this was 1.2 completed with everything in there, and that's with equipment, all floors, a couple 9 yards. I believe, you know, taking out some of the unnecessaries, would be about $629,000 to finish the interior.
That's consistent with what's in this money.
600 and what?
It says 650 here, she's saying 630 or.
Yeah, it's about 630.
So what you need to do is, I think you need to go back and, you know, sit down and do all of the due diligence of all available funding that you actually have, and what the gap is that is needed.
Assuming that we can fix your structural problem with ownership.
Because that's the only way that we can come up, get some money.
The city would much rather give you the building than come up with another 600,000.
Well, what about matching? What if we matched?
Well, we don't have the 18.
Yeah. And another question, do you even want to own the building? It sounds kind of like it'd behoove you if you could get the buildings, that way you could get the grants, but at the same token, you don't want to own it because then you don't have the money to take care of the maintenance of it on their daily routine.
That's a very good observation. The majority of other animal shelters that operate in similar situations, they don't. They lease the building from the government agency that has the building, and then the animal care agency
Provide the service.
provides the service and supplements as well, subsidizes, you know, other things there, provides a bio community service.
Our lawyer Seastel said he advised to approach it as a tenancy.
I mean, couldn't we even do like an MOU?
A tenancy to be tenants.
Where the
Provide
city
the
would still hold
service.
title, but yet they have say 25-year MOU, $1 per year, something like that, so you can show there was some compensation.
Les, what do you think of that
Well, I think that'd be fine, and I don't want Laurel or Pat to think like they're getting some kind of concept sort of rammed down their throats, and I know that's not your intent.
I'm just throwing out ideas.
No, I understand. I mean, I think that there's a little bit of non-understanding on this side in terms of what is being proposed, and it would be a long-term lease at a very, like you said, nominal amount, not some kind of exorbitant rent amount that the city is trying to charge.
But then they can't get grants.
Well,
we
right.
Or do you
But
want
what-
us to write the grants?
But we might be able to collaborate, especially in the context of Noah's Ark being the city's animal shelter. I mean, you're kind of a quasi municipal organization anyway. We're not trying to make it so that you can't qualify for grants or write them or do
No, but if they
anything.
lease it and don't own it, they can't qualify for grants, is what we heard in the first 15 minutes of this.
Right, well, that's what she says, she still just told them as well, to present yourself as tenants rather
Yes.
than owners.
Uh-huh.
Right, but then
And-
they
and-
can't get grants, so why
I
are we
understand
exploring
that.
it? Yeah.
Well,
It-
I'm
No,
curious
we'd be
what
your
grants-
tenants,
But
and
look,
you would have the grants.
Right.
The city would.
we
There-
could
I
provide
think-
grant writers. That's not a problem.
Well,
There were, I don't mean to interrupt, Councilman.
go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say, there were a number of legal concepts, and I think that we do just maybe need to kind of flesh out the details and talk about some of these things and make it so that we can, have a suitable arrangement so you guys qualify for grants and whatever is the best ownership structure for the city and for Noah's Ark, I think we can come up with something.
And the way it was left was that the DOLA grant and the USDA grant, they'd be very good grants for us. And the agreement was, we would write the grant and the city would sign off on it. When we looked into it, that's not gonna work for us, because number one,
Neither one of them.
yeah, neither one of them would work. We spent hours on
I-
looking into this, and
At
it
this
was,
point, I'm confused, because there was optimism when the opening speech happened, and now there's pessimism. So I find it hard to fill a gap when I don't know whether you're being optimistic or pessimistic.
the optimism is the building's built, it's up there, it's gonna be great, it's
No,
gonna be
no,
wonderful, we
there
gotta
was
find a way.
specific talk that you thought you could raise more money.
At the beginning, before we looked into that, we aren't.
At the beginning of this meeting, it was said.
The thing that concerns me and what I'm hearing is that you even have some concern about the longevity of being able to maintain this.
Well, a building that size, if you look at utilities, insurance alone, in all aspects, in where Noah's Ark's numbers are, like $100,000. I mean, it's, and all the salaries and the increase in salaries that's also coming up. There's quite a bit there.
Well, we're
So
between the rock.
So how did we get, if we knew that was going to be a problem, why do we have a 6,000 square foot building?
Because the studies show that that's the size of building that is needed to service this area.
But the study failed to include all the considerations and criteria you just described.
Actually, it was included in there. There was a feasibility study done with that as well. There's a building sizing study and then the feasibility study as well.
The
And both of those-
feasibility study was more or less to see if we could get the private sector to donate large amounts of money, something similar to what the hospital. But let me ask you a question. So what kind of maintenance fees do you have now? What kind of maintenance expense do you have now at that shelter?
Well,
That
right.
would increase in a newer, more energy efficient building?
Energy, well, that would be amazing. Well, currently we are technically still leasing, like the building. Part of the utilities are paid, not by us, but we cover the other half for the cat side. And so a building that size, which is sadly inadequate, probably about 40,000 just for maintenance,
That's
$35,000.
just for the cinder block building that's there now?
The cinder block plus
And that's
the
not
old
true.
trailer that's there
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
Connex box. Just for upkeep on property and insurance and things like that.
The other thing that I would like to see is what are your costs going to be, your monthly costs going to be or estimated? And that would include salaries, that would include any rental, that would include any utilities. Those are all things that I think that we need to look at as well.
I can provide those to you.
And I need to address the history here too. I've been there since the inception of Noah's Ark. The city owned it previous to that, with the employees of Noah's Ark being city employees. Couple of ladies showed up to council and said, we have an idea here. You see the way the shelter's been run? We want to be maybe the caretakers of the shelter. We think we can do a better job. The inception was to provide a service to the city. Wonderful agreement. The building was built, the building was already there. Noah's Ark, 501c3, entered the picture to run the shelter from the day-to-day operation. And that's the way it's been ever since. Now it's kind of switched over where now the responsibility is going to be more than providing service to the city. We want you to finish that building and we want you to expend all that kind of money and all the thing that needs to be done to complete it. There's 5 people in our director trying to sit down and find out how can we raise that kind of money. We thought with 2 grants we'd be sitting pretty. Those were not feasible. That they weren't going to work at all from the get-go, and they finally told us what all the details were going to be. So what we're looking at now is maybe a little 2,000 grant here from this entity, then maybe 2,000 more from this, then another maybe 1,500 from this. That's a lot of
Okay,
writing.
so now, that's helpful to me, Pat, because I thought I was hearing that if you could only solve the ownership structure, you could go to a lot of places, including philanthropic funds. And that's not the case at this point?
No.
Okay.
And
That's
the
helpful
other
to me.
thing I think the city needs to consider is, if we go ahead and find the funding and we do the HVAC, the plumbing, the electrical, the drainage, all of that, the walls, everything that needs to be done, then if and when we leave, I hope it would never happen, but it could, Noah's Ark board could say, bye. Then you'd be in the position of buying all that
Right,
back
that's
from
where we
us.
are now.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's like what happened at Pueblo. You know, that was a really awkward situation for us.
Greg, what do you see as,
Well, right now, the city's paying the utilities on the current thing.
For the dog side,
Yeah.
not for the cats or for the people.
But also, if it's a city-owned building, there aren't property taxes on it. Probably would be covered through CIRSA rather than going to find private insurance for it. And those are real costs that are going to be incurred here. These aren't like kind of sort of costs. These are the real deal. And it's going to cost that kind of money to run this thing. Right now, we're paying a big chunk of the utilities, and we're also giving them $25,000 each year, and that's not enough. So the cost of operating this thing is going to be pretty big.
Well, I think we need to look at the 25,000.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's why I say we need to look at all of these figures before we come up with.
You know, another opportunity we may not be looking at is if we could do something with that original piece of property that was donated to you.
Hazard Park?
That too.
It's part of our
My
comprehensive
phone
plan
line-
along Santa Fe
phone
Trail.
My
so many
phone line
times,
blew up,
so-
Carlos. It was crazy. It was like picket signs.
What was that?
Well,
Oh,
not,
no,
not
no.
doing animal
No, I'm
shelter.
doing an animal shelter down there.
As a
no,
park,
no,
Because
just
of
as
economic development or something.
something.
Soccer
Oh,
field?
why?
Because then it's like
not
it's
big
it's
enough.
not just you're just taking or receiving and we're just giving. We're getting something in lieu of, and that might be something to consider for another potential property for economic development. I don't know.
It is kind of a weird shape to it.
Maybe a soccer field. I don't know. I'm just thinking
It's not big enough.
it's not big enough for that.
You're talking about that triangle with.
Yeah.
Is there any more, excuse me,
Go ahead.
is there any more expense that the city is looking at as far as stubbing the utilities out there, bringing the utilities in and stuff like that to the shelter?
We have the stuff going to the
That's all
building.
stubbed there already? Is there any more to bring it in to, is that the cost for the city too or not?
It'd be very minimal, so everything's right there, but because of the swimming pool.
Okay.
Power's right there, the water, the sewer
Did we
line.
get the plumbing in the floor?
No, we did not put plumbing in the floor, we stubbed
We
through
were
the
told
walls.
not
There's no
to at
floor.
the time because
Because of
they
the
needed to
design.
have an engineer design the floor drain system, and they said,
So
so
what
don't put a
happens now?
floor.
There's
no floor yet.
What happens now with that then?
Mhm.
What happens now with that? With the floor and the plumbing and,
It's all gotta be designed.
There's no floor in it
We
yet,
have
it's
some
four
more-
walls and dirt in the middle.
That's all it's.
You have a,
If I may just throw in my opinion, looking at it in a real estate perspective, most people who lease a building, will lease an infrastructure, and then they are tasked with finishing the inside for their specific purpose. Usually it includes the walls, a floor, and HVAC. Now, if you wanna remodel plumbing, electrical, walls, whatever, flooring, that's up to you. But, I mean, for me, I think we would be more than thrilled to have just the roughed-in plumbing, the floor, and the HVAC covered. From what I've seen of the plans and the estimates, and know of building around here, I would estimate that would probably run probably $250,000. If we got that covered, I believe we could raise more than enough to finish the rest of the inside. Aside from applying for grants, we've sent out direct mailers just recently. We have that property for sale, but that may take a while to sell. But that was an idea, to trade it to you in lieu of. And the other thing I really wanted to point out was, if we had to spend every penny that we have saved, we would have no contingency for the possibility of an economic downturn or unforeseen future expenses. So that's just how I'm looking at it.
and those are the type of numbers that we need to have, what your possibilities are. If you need a contingency fund, what that contingency fund you're going to need for like your downturn and
Well,
all these
yeah.
other things. And I think those are all numbers that I think we need to be able to see before we can
And just,
come up.
just
with some
roughly
percent before we brainstorm. Right now, we're just trashing, in the wind here.
Yeah, but
And that's
without going to bid or getting estimates from people, because we really couldn't do that until you give us the okay to take over. I was thinking probably 100,000 for the floor and the rough-in, and then 100,000 for HVAC and 50 for, well,
He's
50
talking
for
about
the
global
plumbing.
numbers.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Sources and uses, contingency, what your operating budget needs to be. He's talking numbers on a much broader basis than that.
I'm looking at the overall.
Yeah,
The key to this is not the city just leasing the building to a totally uninterested party that's gonna do whatever they want with it. This was a partnership from day one, and I think we need to look at it that way.
Here's the real thing here is that I'm concerned about is being that we have to provide that service somehow anyhow as an animal shelter. So we're between a rock and a hard place. We gotta figure out something, but we need, in order to make informed decisions, we need to have these numbers in front of us.
We can definitely provide
So,
that.
I think let's go back and do your due diligence on your side.
We have it all,
And,
we have it all.
and then, bring it forward and we'll, so that we can distribute it before we get to the meeting. And we all of us can have a little bit.
And right now, we've commissioned an architect, a schematic architect, that's gonna be working on all the plumbing and electrical and all that.
What's the cost
We've
of
taken
the
that on,
architect?
what does that cost right now?
We set a budget of 15,000, probably come in underneath that.
As opposed to what we were given as an estimate, 70,000 for it.
Yeah, the original architect said
But this is-
$100,000.
This architect is an animal lover, we got a lot of breaks from people. They want
Okay,
to-
let's go ahead and wind this up. I think we need to move on to our next line item. I think we can understand what we're looking for, our concerns, and we understand your
We can
concerns.
definitely do that.
Then you're over to another work session when
Oh,
we
yes,
get that.
we'll have to have maybe
We
more
have it
than
all,
that.
we have to combine.
Might have to more than that, so.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Anthony,
Appreciate
you have
that.
something?
Yeah, thank you for
Thank you.
taking care of our animals.
Thank you for the opportunity to work together on this and solve problems. Thank you.
It'll happen.
It still doesn't touch their.
How about some
Also come back with a
but they said
cover
you
letter
can't.
or some tangible documentation.
Oh, no, I
We
thought
What-
it was okay. to-
Not what do you have, what do you end up in if you could have a magic wand, what do you want? What do you want?
Okay, I thought.
You want the city to fund it?
Go ahead. Let it answer,
You know what, you
speak.
decide.
I couldn't hear him, but
No.
go ahead, Lisa.
What I'm asking them,
Go ahead.
what I was asking them to do is, in addition to bring the list of available resources, bring a quite candid statement of what you want. Because there was like little give and take here, very, first there was this, then there wasn't, then that got pulled back, and then all of a sudden there was this other opportunity, and it was hard, this was like playing poker, and people were showing cards one at a time here. And that wasn't, we weren't getting anywhere. We need you to be very candid. What you wanna be a renter.
We wanna
So-
be a tenant.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Well, that's what, begin. We want to be a tenant. And then list all of, you want us to do whatever. You are willing to do what. So we have at least a base point to start. Then what we can do is take collective resources to apply them to that. And at the same time, we will, I guess, have our dream list as well.
Okay.
And that's part of this as well, too.
Sure.
It's like, what can we do for the city?
Exactly.
That's huge. The other thing, please also consider is that maybe possibly bringing the county in a little bit on the building, if city would be open to that as well.
Do you service
We do.
county residents?
We do.
Sure.
To what percentage? Well, it's not important to know that. When you bring your numbers, that's
Approximately
good.
20%.
That would be a discussion you would have to have with them, honestly.
But
We can't
would you
speak
be
for
open
them.
to that
Oh,
before I
sure.
even go
Of course,
approach
of
them?
course.
Yeah, yeah.
Just sharing a building with
Sure.
them, or some of the
I'd like to-
responsibility of the building.
I'd like to know that the county doesn't contribute anything.
No, I talked to the county and the commission said, we know we have that responsibility, we have no money, but I guess they're expecting a lawsuit to be settled. And he said, come back, it's a squeaky wheel, keep coming back, we'll have the money, but not now.
We'll keep them in the loop and, keep hammering away at them.
And all three of them said, we know our responsibility, we'll do it, not now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
They're hard to say no to, Fletcher.
Item number 2, a noise ordinance. Greg, what, yeah.
We put this on here at Councilmember Miles' request. You wanna just explain the complaints that you received?
I do, I've had a couple of, I think we all got a letter from the citizens
Yeah.
saying that he was very concerned, he may be here today.
Yeah,
Tom Lang.
Tom.
Tom,
Tom, you want to participate? You can participate if you want. Come in and have a seat.
and, I'd gotten, a separate complaint from Tom, and I don't know whether, I'm at liberty to reveal
Right
what
here,
it was.
$5 to get in.
But this person was trying to get, the noise ordinance enforced, and she was told that it's not enforceable because it's only at night, and this problem was happening during the day. Now, then Greg came to me that very night, I think, and you showed me the thing with the underlying thing that says between the hours of
Mhm.
11 p.m. and 6 a.m., but as I read the ordinance fully now, it covers a lot of situations that aren't just at night. So I think maybe we've got and then I read, not word for word, but the other ordinances which are, from the other cities, which are, I think, unnecessarily complex. I think
Right.
ours works. But the question is, can someone get it enforced? The provisions that apply during the day, and I know her situation, and the ordinance actually does cover it, it's just the police are telling her it doesn't.
And if I could please explain a little bit about why in your packet for today, under the item number 2, you have a copy of the ordinance. And in the beginning, in paragraph 1 of the ordinance, you have a general prohibition. The very start, under noises, scope of prohibition, you have a general kind of blanket ordinance regarding not having excessive noises. It's perfect, it's great, everything is fine. Then you go down to paragraph D as in Delta, and paragraph D says that any stereo phonograph, which is kind of, arcane language, but any kind of like musical noise is prohibited from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. So if you have someone cranking their stereo, like at 10 o'clock at night, the officers will go out and say, well, it isn't 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., so you're okay. You're not in the forbidden hours. In other words, paragraph D kind of carves out like an exception to the
I understand.
beginning. Okay,
Police think it covers everything.
right.
And actually,
Right.
when I first read it and Greg handed it to me, I said, oh, it's only, the entire ordinance
Right.
only goes between 11 p.m. to 6 a.m.
Right.
But
right.
it doesn't.
You're right.
There are
You're
provisions of this that can be enforced,
right. You're correct. The problem
And would
though is.
cover that person's situation.
Right.
I don't know about Mr. Lang's situation.
And I will shut up and let Mr. Lang speak in just a moment, but the other problem is, let's say you have a really loud car going down the road, and it clearly violates any, semblance of reasonable, allowable noise levels. Well, it's hard to say or to prove or to demonstrate that this car that went by at 11:55 a.m. down Animas Street in the city of Trinidad. Well, those are the
That's not-
complaints we get.
People are having habitual abusers
Okay,
of their peace and quiet,
okay,
and that for hours at a time, and the police will show up, but they'll say, there's nothing we can do.
right.
And I think there is.
Okay, so what I would say is, if people are at home and they're having their domestic tranquility interrupted, it's usually by stereos. It's usually by a neighbor's stereo, right? I mean, that's true. So just work with me on that for a moment, if you would, please. So if it's 10 o'clock at night, you can do it because it's not the witching hours of 11 to 6. So the officers will show up. You get a noise complaint, it's 10 p.m. on a Tuesday. The officers will show up and say, you're not running afoul of our ordinance because it isn't past 11 p.m. Okay.
Because it says, subject to the provisions of this section, the creation of any unreasonably loud, disturbing, and unnecessary noise at any time is prohibited.
Correct. But
There seems to be a redundancy, but one doesn't vitiate the other.
I would say, okay, I don't want to make you.
No, I'm saying there's a separate provision which I think is not necessary, which says the playing of any radio, phonograph, or any musical instrument in any place in a residential apartment, hotel district at any time between 11 p.m. and 6. It's not necessary because you got the first thing which you
Good. Gotcha. So I agree. We could get rid of paragraph D.
Right.
We can renumber all those
Let's
paragraphs.
start enforcing paragraph 1.
Okay, no, and that's great, but the only problem is it's a little nebulous what is unreasonable, what is excessive noise. I mean, right? And so those other ordinances, and I agree with you, they really are lengthy and they seem to be too wordy, the sample ordinances you have. But they have like decibel levels in some of them. They have, anyway. So I just want to say it can be hard to say what was unreasonable in any given context as I'm thinking about proving this citation in municipal court and coming forward and saying, well, that clearly was unreasonable, and they say, well, not for me, right? So I'm just thinking out loud. I don't mean to run too
I think
far.
I'd like to get some information from Mr. Lang talk, because I'd like to know, I know that you have mentioned to me as well about the
Right,
noise in
I've
the
talked
area.
to several
And
people
the
here.
thing about it is, how did you register, were you able to register the decibel level in any way yourself, or
Well,
how did you determine that the noise was?
well, there's a certain, my issue isn't directly about the noise itself, it's about the noise maker. And what I mean is the device itself. Colorado state law, and we have adopted the model traffic code in this town, and so the model traffic code is really specific as well as the city code in its language, and it has nothing to do with decibels. It has to do with modifying your vehicle. Here it is, 42.4.225 of the Colorado Model Traffic Code, and we can't be more lenient than what the state code is. But that doesn't matter because we adopted it anyway.
You have a copy of that, can you read that to us?
Yeah, it says mufflers, prevention of noise. Every motor vehicle subject to registration and operated on a highway shall at all times be equipped with an adequate muffler in constant operation and properly maintained to prevent any excessive or unusual noise. And no such muffler or exhaust system shall be equipped with a cutoff, bypass, or similar device. No person shall modify the exhaust system of a motor vehicle in a manner which will amplify or increase the noise emitted by the motor of such a vehicle above that emitted by the muffler originally installed. You know, it goes on, but you get the point. It doesn't say decibels. It doesn't say doesn't say that you have to have to go to court, for example, that you have to have data. You just say, this muffler was installed for the purpose of creating noise, and there are ways of demonstrating that. Meaning you can go to a website, for example, and look at where these people buy these devices. Yeah, what I'm talking about right now, this is something that's relatively new, and I know, the motorcycles, that's, I don't even want to tackle that particular issue right now. I don't. But there are pickup trucks, and there are some classic cars. There are some other vehicles. But the newest thing in town here, in my neighborhood up there where you live,
Right.
is the what they call the racers, the little Japanese cars with the exaggerated spoilers on top, which doesn't bother me in the least. But what bothers me is that they put on the so-called fart cans, the resonators, which are designed to do one thing: make noise.
Right.
And there's an example that's easy to demonstrate with photographic evidence, what have you. You can make audio recordings, or better yet, video recordings of those vehicles going down the highway, and they clearly, there's some common sense that should be involved in here, which is that loud? And the average person would say, yeah, that's really loud. So I'm not going after everybody, because it's way too broad, it's too big a fight. But if you don't tackle the worst offenders, the ones who have definitely modified their exhaust for specifically the purpose of the noise aspect of it. And I'm not talking about loud pipes saving lives or anything like that. I'm talking about driving around town, cruising Main Street, even as we were sitting here going up and down Los Animas. Anytime I'm in a meeting of arts and culture, it's disturbing to hear this happening. And I also play at the museum in art, the Music on the Lawn series. And even last Friday, we were out there. It was our last gig. It was we were piggybacking on Blues Fest, Pre-Fest, and man alive, the street ended right there at Chestnut. It was blocked. These vehicles would go up that street, around, come back down, and this happened so many times while we were trying to play, and it was just so disruptive. And anybody, when everybody in the crowd is looking at the street instead of at the performers, then it's pretty disturbing.
Mr. Downs, if I may interrupt, I just want to ask you, being a mechanic for so many years as I was, I know we couldn't alter any kind of mufflers or suspension and stuff on vehicles, because if we would do it and we get caught, we could get a hell of a fine or sometimes jail sentence. And that's been years ago. And I believe the law still states that today, that you can't alter or do anything at this time.
Our ordinance covers it.
Yes, the ordinance, chapter 16.
So,
Our ordinance 2B, the use of any automobile, motorcycle, streetcar, or vehicle built out of repair, so loaded or in such a manner as to create a loud and unnecessary grating, grinding, rattling, or other noise.
It's a point of
So
view.
it's more than what you're complaining about is
Right.
covered. I think we've got an enforcement issue. But
I think that's a big
That was
issue.
my entire point, and that's
a lot
the
of that.
point of the presentation that I was going to make. And the reason I didn't make that presentation, I discussed this with Councilman Matei, and he said, present it as a quality of life issue. But then I thought, subsequent to editing and re-editing and so on and so forth before making this presentation, I said, what's council gonna do? It's already there. It's not, there's nothing to tweak. It's a matter of enforcement. But Les brought up at the August 6th meeting, which is why I'm here, because I was encouraged when I viewed that video that
We're looking at you, Tom.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry.
So it was posted, and I looked at it, and the issue came up at the end of the session on August 6th. And I said, wow, somebody else did this besides me, so maybe there's some, maybe there's something to grab onto there, and maybe we can do something. But it is an enforcement issue, and Les said, providing proof is the difficult task.
Well, I think so one of the things that could possibly do, and it goes back to the residents of the city, is if they see a vehicle like that, if they can get a license plate number and report it to the police, and the police can go up and check to see if they are out of modification.
Well,
That would be
yeah,
the only way
and
to
I talked to the police department, and I was told, yes, get the license plate number of this particular violator, okay? Which I did, but I was told that I'd have to testify in court. And I thought, why is the onus on me to prove it? Why don't they just send somebody up there at 4:30 in the afternoon when this race, you talk about drag racing, that mile-long strip of stone wall, it's a straightaway, and it's not heavily populated, but it's populated, and so they use that thing as a racetrack. And I wouldn't even care so much about that personally, but it's this, shove it down into first and floor it, pedal to the metal and then back off on it, and then the car backfires. So it's just the most irritating thing in the world, and I thought, what are my choices here? If I confront the individual, and I've had this happen before, this is an issue for me, and it's gone on for, I've studied this issue for many years, and I taught the physics of sound, so I understand all of that aspect of it. I've taught dB meters, people to use dB meters, and they're pretty easy to use. And these days, there's one on my smartphone, and it's pretty good. So yeah, capturing that data, getting the data to go to court. But when you go to court, then and you're facing your accuser. Now you're a target. You become a mark, and this, as I said, has happened to me in the past. Where
unfortunately, that is part of the
justice system.
Yeah,
exactly right. Exactly right.
If you're going to bring it forward, you need to be able to testify, and I know it could be kind of
but
difficult.
My point was,
it is difficult.
Why don't I just report it, and the police can go out there and do what they do, which is cite the individual, and then that individual can.
That'd be a safer way for you also than any of us.
This is why people don't come forward, and nobody's come forward on this issue other than apparently recently. Everybody I talk to says, yeah, that's irritating, it's really, but what can you do about it? Because number one, people don't know what the ordinance says. They don't know what the law is, and they assume since everybody's doing it, it must be legal. So what's going to happen is it's going to get worse, because everybody, unless you put your foot down somewhere and go after the worst offenders. I'm not talking about blanket every single vehicle that you seem to think is relatively noisy, but there are some people who drive loud.
Wes.
Thank you, Merritt. I just want to say I understand everything that Mr. Lane just said, and I'm sorry that it is nerve-wracking and difficult when you have to come forward as a witness. And if anyone were stupid enough to threaten your safety, jeopardize your, anything on a noise complaint, then they're really, really, really desperate. I mean, I get it if you're a complaining party on some kind of felony prosecution and you're your real safety is threatened. But if you make a noise complaint, Mr. Lang, I will tell you that the officers can take the report. It's still going to be hard to prove in court. But if I don't have a complaining witness, if I don't have someone who comes forward, otherwise it's totally trial by hearsay, by non-accusers. I mean, you wouldn't want to be on trial for something. And I know, I'm not trying to be.
No, but it's, yeah.
And I get it.
But I think what Mr. Downs is trying to say is it's tough to adjudicate when you don't have the witness that was there who saw it or heard it firsthand.
Right.
No, but that's why I say,
But the
you
problem-
say that every day at this particular time, this event happens.
The only way to resolve that, and I'm not sure how that could be done, would be when the police go and talk to that individual, to take that vehicle and see what it actually does.
Right.
I don't know if that's
I
illegal.
don't think
or
legally
not.
you can
That's-
force
it. You can't do
I don't
that.
know.
You
That's
can't
what-
force
that's-
him to start it.
Exactly.
You're treading on.
But it's
Right.
pretty,
I know,
it's
but
pretty
if you
simple.
capture, yeah, go ahead.
It's pretty
Rick.
simple to sit and look at a stock exhaust system on any car, and you look on the back of them and the mufflers are
Make a
this
couple-
big.
make a copy.
There's definite modification that creates a
What-
noise problem. Same with the diesel trucks, with the stacks
Stacks
out
out
the
of the
back,
box.
this big, and they drive down to right till they get a crowd of people,
And they roll
and they
smoke.
floor it, and they leave a
Right.
it's
Yeah.
ridiculous where this
That's right.
is going and the annoyance of it. And at
Exactly.
some point, we do as the town need to take a stand on this and do something about it. And it takes the tickets to start or whatever
To
the
your
case
point,
may
when
be.
we were writing tickets for that, it was not so much relative to decibels and volume, so much as it was that it was an altered exhaust system.
Yeah.
Period.
Nice.
That's it, that's what we need.
And that, the
Yeah.
statute, I mean, the cheat sheet wrote that way. 42,
Listen,
4, yada,
I
yada,
rode a
altered exhaust
motorcycle
system.
and we lived under the, loud pipes save lives. So we've dealt with it, I've dealt with it my whole life, and that's why I don't do the modifications to a point. People looking twice saves lives that don't take loud pipes. There's other ways to make you, if you're look at me, these people with this look at me attitude, I need everyone to see me, is just ridiculous, and it's getting worse and worse.
It is.
At some point,
That
we've gotta
was my
do
point.
something.
Les, why don't
It
you
is.
do this, I don't know, maybe between you and Mr. Sund and get together with, probably the chief of police. I don't know if there's any solution to this, but maybe you guys can discuss it. If you want to, get Mr. Lang involved or Ms. Miles involved, that's fine too. But I think that discussion.
I think we should give a little bit more of a clearer direction to them, say, hey, have this being enforced. Versus just having a discussion.
Well, they
Let's
have-
just start having them enforce this
How could
code.
this change so that you would have an easier time
To
enforcing?
enforce.
Well, I mean, he's got a
If
decibel
this-
reader. We have other tools that we outfit our police department with. Why can't we get a decibel reader for all
You
of
can
them?
look and see clearly a
Then that's what-
modification.
Right.
It's easy to see.
And this issue about every cop nowadays has a smartphone.
Right. If I could, please, what I can do is, especially like I can sit down with Judge Nelson, Desiree Sandoval, and Dan Duran, Charlie Glorioso. There are various categories here. Modification of an exhaust system. We could talk about that. We can also talk about vehicle noise levels. If there is a complaint, you have to have a complaining party, but perhaps we can, move it forward. If there is in fact a complaint from a person on a car going by making too much noise, and they get a license plate number, and they, the car is clearly too loud. Also, home stereos, car stereos. There are a number of different. Yeah, right, exactly. We can take out paragraph D.
Well,
That's one
and
modification.
also the second sentence of paragraph 1, it's there too.
Yeah, I would take it out of
Okay.
paragraph
The
two.
time.
Yeah, right.
Mr.
Yeah.
Matei, you had a.
In as much as citizens partnering with the police department, if there's a regular occurrence every day at 3:15 when he comes home from school, it can't be that difficult to have a police officer make himself available at that location at that time, so that he can make personal observation of the violation, and then you don't need a complaining witness.
That was my point. And this is what the reason that nobody comes forward is because if that, when I said being on the wrong end, of somebody being chastised for making too much vehicle noise, and that did happen in my neighborhood a few years ago, that person would make a point of going by my place and
Just don't do it.
giving me the double salute. And that was really uncomfortable, and it took a conversation, not from me to them, but I went to the mayor at that time, who was Joe Rivera, and he went and talked to them, because Joe knows everybody.
You know, we're talking, here's the thing that we have, and I know that we're talking about your particular situation. We have to figure out a way how the rest of the citizens would handle these situations, and that's why I say, figuring out what to do is, for the rest of the people.
Now, I have one last comment. What happens if we have a vehicle that's older but still functioning, and say there's a hole in the catalytic converter?
Right.
And it is not modified by the owner's hand or by some other mechanic, but yet they can't afford to get it remedied. And they have a noise disturbance, even though it's not a modified vehicle. Is this still gonna be, leaning into this ordinance?
Catalytic converter's a whole different thing anyway.
You cannot eliminate a catalytic converter off any car.
No, but say there's a hole in it.
You gotta repair it.
I had an ex-girlfriend who had this car who had a hole in it because she knocked it.
And what would happen is,
Right.
but what would happen is, if someone got a ticket for that, and they came in and they showed that they had it repaired, I would probably dismiss.
Yeah.
It's all about rectifying the problem.
I don't feel bad, just like I said, the mayor and I in our neighborhood have a lot of problems too, so.
Well, everybody
We
does,
know-
it's
we
not
know what
just,
you're going
it's not
through
just
and
me, I
everything
just,
else. You know.
I just came forward because.
I wanna thank you for coming forward, at least, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We all appreciate
Let me just finish by just saying this, if there's any way I can assist you, council, the city in any way with some of the knowledge that I have about this, I'd be happy to do that. I can send you links, to websites and that discuss this issue. I know how other cities have dealt with it or are attempting to deal with it. It's not Trinidad, it's everywhere.
Okay, Les, why don't you take the bull by the horns and see what you can do with this?
Yes, sir.
But you got my contact information, so if there's anything that you
Thank Don.
want me to do.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening, I really do, this encourages me a lot.
Good.
All right.
On to item number 3, infrastructure. Mike, why don't you come throw this at the table here? You know, this is, I'm not sure if I'm the only one, I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I've been insisting on this infrastructure discussion simply because I know we all are just concerned with our infrastructure, the age of it, and moving forward with it and identifying what can we do, what can't we do, what's absolutely necessary. And Mr. Valentine, my question for you is, do you have an idea of what infrastructure is probably at the most critical point at this time? I think that's where we begin. Because I know you have a history and you've seen all of the infrastructure issues that we have, anywhere from our main line coming from the water treatment source to all of the feed lines here in Trinidad. And we need to look at which is more important to tackle. How do we move forward with this? What is step 1? What's step 2? What? These are things that I think that are baffling all of us.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So, yeah, when I came back to the city and started, about 5 years ago, and started looking at our infrastructure, it's overwhelming, and I started to get inventories on what we have, and cast iron pipes. We have 43.5 miles of old cast iron pipes that are in our water. That's just cast iron, 43 miles, 43.5.
That's in town?
That's, yes, correct, in our distribution system.
Okay.
Ductile iron, we have 9 miles. Galvanized, we have 4.73 miles. I've done that and looked at that and tried to get the inventory. And then,
how many miles is the ductile iron?
ductile iron is
9 miles?
9.18. And then sewer sewer lines, we have 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch, 12-inch clay tile lines. The main clay tile line that we have in our system, in our sewer system, is 8-inch. We have 40 miles of that. We've seen it collapse. Our gas system was initially put in 1950 with steel lines. We maintain that. Some is coated, some is not coated. We are always trying to take care of that. Our electrical system is hanging in there, but in the summertime, now we're pushing the top limits of our substation capacity. And there are times when we question whether we should start up the old Enterprise just to kind of help us get through that, that time.
That's expenses.
That's exactly. Everything is expensive. Key word, expensive. Where do we start? So what I'm looking at is trying to get an asset management program. It's the EPA has it spread laid out on how you can do this, and I've tried to get the mapping. I've tried to get these spreadsheets together to try and figure it. It becomes overwhelming. So I'm looking toward the asset management. One of my first steps was to get the meters going, because that's how we generate income, by our meters. So if we're collecting per usage, then we're getting the return, and then with that return we could use it toward the infrastructure. Right now, it's a bit overwhelming of selecting where to start. We started with the Old Town with our $3 million grant. Just so council knows, we're in the process of trying to revise the grant, because DOLA's match was for road surface only. We did the 24-inch, we replaced 24-inch in 2nd Street, and really the surface was the minimal part of that grant. It was all the excavation and installation of, all the utilities. So we're trying to revise that so we can keep that going. When we went to do the slip lining, which I thought, well, that's going to be good. So we cleaned all the lines, cambered them. We had to step back, because we had to do like $300,000 of point repairs throughout the city to go down there and fix the old clay tile lines so that we could slip line them. Not replace them, just slip line them and put a pipe within a pipe. So, I'm looking toward an asset management just to try and get it just pinpointed on where we start and how we. That way, I can come to council and say, I've done numbers, rough numbers on what it would take to replace. Every year with the water and the wastewater, we apply to DOLA. We let them know our eligibility survey. The wastewater, our cost with the collection system and the interceptors and plant rehab, we're at 25 million that we put in, saying that's what we need, that's our wish list. If we come to you for grants or loans, that's where we're at. On the water system, we're at 26,300. Those are submitted yearly.
So those two areas, I look at probably the most two critical areas is wastewater and water itself. That's kind of the way I look at it. And my concern has been, and I've talked to you about this, is the main line coming out of Mine Lake. What condition that's in? I know some of it's kind of piecemeal. There's some that's newer, and there's some a lot of it that's older.
Right.
And I keep going back to what happened in the eighties when, we had a major fracture in the water line.
Right.
Or what is a couple of weeks. And, if there's a major fracture there, then the entire city is,
Yeah, that's our only,
that's it.
that's our only artery.
So I almost kind of look at, is that the first place that we look? That's something that you have to determine, or help us to determine. Because if at least water comes into the city, at least we have a distribution point somehow. Otherwise, we don't.
Right.
Our sewage system, we're working on that main one going down to, that one that we're working on now.
From commercial down to the plant.
Is there another system that feeds the city that's in bad shape, of the sewer line? So those,
Oh. Yes.
I think, as a matter of fact, I think that when Gabe was here, it sounded like we're not too far off of the tab here. I asked him, I said, if we miraculously could come up with the money to fix all of our infrastructure problems, what would it cost? And he estimated $100 million just off the top of his head. And you're just by the
Yeah,
figure.
just by two, yes.
You're probably right.
That's a lot of marijuana.
That's a lot of marijuana. So, we just gotta figure out, and I think you're on the right track. We have to start somewhere to begin to get a plan together to move forward with this.
Right.
And the citizens need to know that we're at a critical, juncture in time, that we need to do something.
Our situation is probably, and I'm just guessing, can't be that dissimilar to what Walsenburg or Alamos or anybody has.
Exactly.
And, we just need to have a logical, well-thought plan. How to, rather than wait for it to break and then scamper, fix it. We need to, like vehicles, you gotta kind of maintain the system. And as you have worked laboriously to identify those particular areas, we need to find funding to move those a little bit at a time to get the biggest bang for our buck for what we're trying to do.
We need a long-term plan here.
So, as part of funding, of course, the president had the American Water Infrastructure Act, and, that money is there. There's a lot of caveats. I have to come up with a risk and resilient assessment on our system and emergency response plan for the system. We have emergency action plans, but not an emergency response plan, and I don't have a risk and resilience plan in place. So I've got consultants wanting to come and write that for us so we can go after these funds, and it's like,
What's the
Mike,
percent?
It's only like 20%, isn't it?
yeah.
Mike, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, I've been here a long time on this council, listening to all this kind of stuff, and I think this time of talking and trying to figure things out, what we're gonna do and stuff is kind of expired, and I think the time to start doing something is now. Not until the water line breaks up there. We gotta stop talking, and we gotta say, okay, we're gonna get a crew, we got this total of money, we're gonna go up there on Highway 12, dig this line and start now. Not tomorrow, not next month, because one of these days we're gonna have such an emergency, we ain't gonna have enough money in reserve fund to do anything.
Correct. With all due respect, I think for the last 5 years, I've done just that, period. I've done a lot of projects in 5 years, repairing leaks and
We still
stuff.
have a line, that's the main artery to this city, that's still sitting up there, that's been up there for 10 years or whatever it is, that we have pieced in every other year. We have a break in it, we piece it. The next 2 years down the road, we have another piece. It's time, we have to do
Well,
it.
the big thing is what he's saying here, Mr. Vidal, is that, in order to, qualify for funding, we've gotta do all of these steps. We have to get a consultant, we gotta look.
Funding for our infrastructure.
Excuse me for 1 second, we gotta take a step at a time, and I wish we could just say, send our crew up there and start digging, but that's not the reality of things.
Well,
So,
and in reality, replacing that line doesn't help you because then you end up with a line. What we should be doing is duplicating it. So
Well,
we-
you're right, and you and I have talked about that.
You know,
What's
we
your
need to
thoughts
have
about that?
redundancy in it. If one of them shuts down, you've got the other one.
What's your thoughts about that?
Well, so the direction things were going prior to me moving over to utilities was to build a water treatment plant at the base of Trinidad Dam. That way, the treatment is done closer and we wouldn't have all that 35 miles of line. What that does though is it takes out a good portion of our customer base, because there's over 800 customers upriver that depend on us for the water. So,
And they already, you know, would that be, we're pretty much indebted to them to provide that service anyway, correct?
well,
Being that they have paid their
they,
fees or whatever.
they've
whether it
paid
was
their
long
fees
ago.
all along, but within our ordinance, it states that our, don't quote me, our responsibility is to the citizens of Trinidad.
Mhm.
Those are secondary, and it's in our ordinances that the citizens come first. I know that's harsh, but it's in our ordinance. Yeah, they've paid their private investment fees toward it and everything. And I agree, we gotta do what we can to keep them with this service.
Even if the filter plant is here, our water source is North Lake.
Correct. Well, it would be a water rights issue to move the water from there to Trinidad Lake into the plant.
Okay.
So
So we don't have.
that's with the direction that
Got it.
everything was headed, and when I came back, we did a $5 million project up at the treatment plant to get it going.
Right.
So it's staying there, we just gotta work on this line, but we work on that line, the cast iron lines in Trinidad. Actually, that line going up there, for the most part, was done in 1969 with ductile iron. That's one of the newer lines in the city, you know, basically. I mean, we've done some PVC lines, but that transmission line was done in, I think, model cities or that area.
When you brought that up about the new filtration plant, I was sitting on council about putting it below the dam, and that time Mr. Duran owned that property and stuff like that, and he wanted so much money at that time for the city to purchase that land. So that was how many years ago? But I don't know. So if we couldn't purchase that land at that time, we certainly can't purchase this now at this time.
Agreed. That's
Yeah,
why
so
that's why
it's
just
gonna
that
be,
idea and upgraded the treatment plant.
Yeah.
So a secondary transmission line, what are we looking at? Is there a different route, a shorter route, anything that?
Actually,
Go alongside
probably
it.
not. We've got easements all along there for the current
Bless
line.
you.
It would be much easier to stay within
Come right
that
in.
easement than try and deal with
Yeah.
easements all the way up. So we've got a 30-foot easement, I believe, 15-foot either side of the existing line. We would come over 5 to 10 feet with the new line. Cost, I haven't done
How big of
that.
the line is that, Lanky? Is that
It varies, it's 24 in places, 20, 18. We're getting ready to replace a piece that's underneath the highway there at the
The old Best Western.
20.8. Yeah, that's part of the old steel line that's
Yeah.
it's more like a soaker hose than it is a carrying
Well,
line.
Mike, what I would like to see personally is, you know, a long-term plan. And the areas that you see are probably the most critical at this point in time, so that we have some place to start.
Sure.
And maybe a plan forward of what you have to do to, you know, if it's consultants or whatever we have to do so that we at least have an idea of what step 1, step 2, step 3. It's kind of like when we talked with people from the animal shelter. We need some idea of some basics so that council can get a good understanding, so that we can at least advise you which way we want to go along with the city manager.
Sure.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dave. Did you need?
Well, I was just gonna say,
you know, along with everybody, thought when we got this cultivation fee, I thought, oh, okay, now we're gonna have something. I asked Cheryl today, we've collected since 2017 the cultivation fee almost 500,000. The Second Street line alone was close to 900,000. So that shows you just that stretch right there was 900,000.
But the first years, there was almost nothing collected.
Right, exactly.
So now
So
we're
we're
a rising,
And
a little bit, yes.
especially with Green Solutions in that new 160 acres and expanded cultivations,
Right.
we're hoping that'll grow a bunch.
Karen has a question.
Yes.
Patiently waiting. Do you have a system where you prioritize, like in each department, the sewer, the water, the gas, whatever, and you have one area that's crucial, critical? Do you apply a factor to that, priority?
You know, that's where I want to go right now. To be honest with you, with 48 miles of cast iron pipe and so many miles of galvanized, we're replacing galvanized as we go. We have areas that are more prone to leaks that we focus on, but to pick the lines, they've all been installed prior to us being born, so it's, you know.
Probably not me.
Are you utilizing your foreman to help you with some of these?
Oh, God,
things?
yeah. There's not enough hours in the day, that's just, yeah.
I have another question. How much is that federal grant worth maximum? Do you know, is
I
there a
do not know
maximum?
that.
It only pays like 20%.
Right.
Oh, okay.
so 80% match.
Yeah.
Does that mean we would have to go after a bond? I mean, honestly, that may be something we have to put to our people because it's for us.
As a matter of fact, if you remember, the last 2 years when I've given my report to the city, I've mentioned that there may be a time that we may have to ask the citizens to okay a bond for us.
Well, I think this is the time that we would have to do
you
it.
really don't have to do that with a revenue bond,
Okay. Well,
because it's a utility. And that's one of the reasons that, we're starting this with replacing the meters, because that, you get a lot more revenue when the meters are producing correct readings.
Right.
And that will help us fund things like that. We'll be able to figure out what our funding
So it would
capabilities
be
are.
off credit then. It would be off credit.
Yeah. Well, but you could go do a bond issue, but you need to know what your capability of paying that bond is. And so once we see what we're really capable of producing in water, we'll know whether we can have the money to reinvest and do some projects.
I'd like to make a comment to Mike. It has nothing to do with the work, the agenda, but I just wanted to tell you when you mentioned smart meters, I know San Isabel's been using them for a long time. So a lady that works with me called, said I have to get home. What happened was lightning struck a transformer by her house out in the county, and San Isabel called her within 5 minutes of that lightning strike, and she was ready to. So I mean, there is validation to that system.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought you'd be interested in hearing that.
Well, hey, Mike, I think you understand where, we're at a critical
Sure.
time and we're all very concerned about infrastructure, so
Yeah.
let's see what you can produce for us so that we
You
can have
bet.
something to work with.
Sure.
Okay,
Did
thank you.
just come up?
And when I saw the infrastructure item,
Yeah.
I didn't know if it was utility infrastructure, but
It's
our
everything.
total road system, everything, the infrastructure is,
Yeah, we have to look at it all.
right, so.
100
Find
million
me
may
money,
not
huh?
cover it. 100 million may not cover it.
Thank you, Mike.
You bet.
Okay, item number 4, short-term rentals. Craig, do you wanna cover that?
Sure. We, this issue came up and there's a question of whether we can charge the lodging tax and business license because they're not, something mentioned in the zoning code. Doesn't concern me as much because I think taxation and zoning are two different issues. It wouldn't be that hard though to amend this into our zoning code, so at worst, I think we're talking about if we amend it into the current code while we're still reviewing the new one, it would lose, we'd lose another month or so, but that wouldn't be that bad.
Well, the thing about it is, in reading the ordinance or the taxation that it is right now, it specifically states, and I didn't bring a copy of that with me, that,
Of the
This is
proposed
the existing
ordinance?
one, this
Yeah.
is the proposed.
proposed one. Let me see if I can see here.
That's
Real
two
quick
sides,
ways
so
finding that, Brian
Okay.
Dykes from Freedom Road has multiple of these type of rentals. He said he would be glad to provide to the city the amount of money that it is and show you all you do is contact the place that lists all of those houses. You tell them what our tax is, they will collect it and send it to the city.
It's
And
real
that
simple.
It is super simple.
If I can-
It's implemented if we're covered.
If I can add to that, we're actually already paying we're paying the 4% sales tax, as it is.
Is that coming, are we getting the 4% sales tax
Yes,
on
they
those?
have to pay the sales.
Okay, perfect, but we can get the lodging and everything,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be no problem. Cool.
Well, and I can't find it here, but in
This
the,
is the flip side.
yeah, you see the part that I was looking for, that it states that somewhere in here in another document, that we should already be collecting this tax anyhow.
Yeah, our
So it
lodging
shouldn't be
tax
that
is
be that
very
difficult.
broad,
It's really broad, it covers everything except sleeping in the backseat of a vehicle.
pretty close.
It's pretty close to that, so I'm not
If you're
really
paying
sure.
for it.
Right, and that's, yeah. So I think the big issue there is, Cheryl, you wanna come forward? So I guess the thing here is that we need to figure out how to sending out notices to these Airbnbs and other entities that are renting out rooms and tell them, the time is up, you have to start providing that additional, 3% tax.
I have a contact with Airbnb. I don't know if they could give me business owners information that way, because I know that you could get on Airbnb and look them up for this area, but I really don't know if those addresses
But if all we have to do is write Airbnb and say, this is the lodging tax, they will just charge it.
Correct.
But that doesn't solve the business license
No,
side of
that
it
we
to
have
get
to
that.
still write.
That'll be the contract.
Well,
part.
couldn't you just pretend, I'm sure there are places where you can ask, does this have a washer and dryer, right? And can't you just say, this is Cheryl Navarette, finance director, City of Trinidad, please give me a ring at your convenience, something like that.
I think the thing that concerns me, are those entities that would try to fly under the radar. And I think that's where we come in, is that if we find somebody that's doing that and not paying what they're supposed to be paying,
Yeah.
that they are fined or closed down or other. So I think that's the thing that we need to figure out.
Will they be out on Craigslist or something like that?
But, yeah, that's what they'd have to do, but
Yeah.
wouldn't we be able to utilize the Airbnb site? If they're collecting the tax, it should provide us who that tax is coming from. At that point, we should have an address and a contact to say, hey, we're receiving your tax for our lodging and everything else. You are required to have a business license, and I think we can catch them on that side to every location and contact information without having to ask anybody. It should come in. Once we contact Airbnb, put that tax in there in place, they collect it and send it. It's gonna have the information we need right there on it.
How many
this-
other websites
This
are
gentleman
there?
here, what's your name?
I'm Ryan.
Ryan? And, do you have an Airbnb or
I manage one.
you manage one? Do you have any comment on this, anything on this?
I guess my curiosity is what the intention behind the licensing is.
Well, I think
We license all businesses.
yeah, any business should be licensed.
So are other landlords licensed?
No, they're not short-term rental.
Not that we're talking about that, I think all.
Well, I guess that's what I'm curious, like what differentiates to the city of Trinidad a short-term rental from a long-term rental that would require them needing a business license.
They make my
Under 30
hotel,
days.
my hotel has to pay the tax, I'm a short-time rental, you're the exact same business. Why should you not have to pay what I'm paying? That's what I'm saying.
If you're in a every business in Trinidad buys a city.
Well, not every landlord in Trinidad, right?
No, but that's for residential.
And so I guess that's what I'm saying, like, I don't see the difference
The
with
cutoff for
that,
me is
right?
at 30 days, I don't collect the lodging tax. It's set up in there, it's for short-time rentals only.
Sure.
Every room I rent by the night, collect 3% lodging tax on that. And I have to have a license to rent that room. You're the same thing as me, you just don't have Cawthon Hotel wrote on the front of your Airbnb, but you are no different than I am at my hotel.
I could see a difference between having a larger, more public-facing, more of a public structure, you know, business-wise or building-wise, versus having renting out a single home or a single room or an apartment or something like that.
Here's the other thing that,
To me, I think so I was just curious, like, what the benefit the city is and what the risk is that the city's having by having that.
it's not only the benefit to the city, but it's the benefit to the person that rents the place. We wanna make sure that your place, has smoke detectors, on the detectors, fire extinguishers, that type of thing, to make sure that anybody that you rent to are protected. That's the other part of it, the licensing procedure.
So you don't have the same concerns with someone who stays for more than 30 days?
We're inspected by the fire department on every room, whether they stay 1 day or 30 days. They come in and inspect our place to make sure we're safe, no matter how long you stay.
Sure.
So we need that same protection every place anybody's renting.
Well, I guess that's what I'm saying is, like, I can see how a hotel structure is, like, really different than a residence. And if you're talking about safety concerns in residence, it shouldn't matter if somebody's staying there 1 day or 30 days.
To
You're
you,
saying right now,
obviously.
like, no, what I'm saying is, like, you're saying other types of tenancy. Somebody's renting an apartment or a room or something like that for 30 days or more. You're not talking about adding licensure and fire inspection, those types of things for those, right?
They're already in
Depends.
place.
Do you have any comment on
Or
that?
sometimes you can
I
if
do.
you are renting through a housing authority. If you have any connection with that entity, then yes, you have to do that. But again, that's because you're getting federal dollars. If you are in the private sector and you're renting to say, I'm renting to Mr. Downs' place for a 6-month, 1-year term, then it's not a necessity because it's not getting federal funding. And that is where that kind of caveat is delineated from housing authority versus the private sector.
Okay.
But also, renting a motel room is not establishing a landlord-tenant relationship. And maybe it's, not fair, but if you have a landlord-tenant relationship, you don't have to have a business license, you don't pay sales tax, you don't pay a lot of kinds of taxes. I don't know why, but renting a hotel room, even for a month, even for a year, you're not establishing a landlord-tenant relationship. And that's one of the lines of demarcation that separates the two. And that's what makes you similar to a hotel, and really a hotel, not a landlord-tenant kind of relationship.
Okay, so what it boils down to right now is, we need to be able to get that word out to all the Airbnbs and anybody who does the short-term rentals. And getting back to you, Cheryl, is how to identify those landlords or owners and to tell them that it's time to start, paying their due or whatever. We also need to come up, whether it's with an ordinance, that they need to have, fire extinguishers, that they need to have smoke detectors, that they need to have gas detectors in there for protection of the citizens. I think these are things that we need to give consideration to.
I think if they're renting a room to anybody, they fall under all the fire codes and everything that's already in place. I don't think anything needs to be added. If you're allowing someone in there, you have to afford them for the protection of that place.
Hey, Les, being that this Airbnb is just, recently new in the last probably few years,
To Trinidad.
to Trinidad, I'm not sure about other areas. Do you feel like we would need an additional ordinance to cover some of those necessary things?
Well, I will tell you, I think possibly, I don't know the answer to that question, Mayor, and I would wanna look into it a little bit better. And I do wanna say, I hope I sent you the ordinances, I'm not sure I did.
You did.
Okay, good, from Pueblo, and I wanna tell you that, it came down from Nick Gradisar to City Council, the City Attorney. They were going to adopt those ordinances and then pass, so they could simply have the Airbnb, the national corporation, collect their tax. I don't know how they were going to do that, but I just wanted to let you know that. And I don't know how they do the lodging tax. But I don't know. I don't know, Mayor, and I think that it may be necessary. I understand what Greg is saying too about, zoning classifications and things of that nature, but I think it may be necessary to have an ordinance or two to ensure compliance in that regard.
Good.
Michelle has expressed concern over issues that might arise in a residential area because of Airbnbs. I've had one lady that's been complaining to me about parking on a very narrow street. There's, if we have to govern and tell these people what they can and cannot do, I think it's something we need to do.
That is another thing that did come up, I forget who I was discussing with, it might have been you, that they need to provide additional parking.
Right.
And not take away parking from their neighbors.
Right.
And so I think that's an issue.
I think it needs to be on a subjective matter though
Yes,
too,
yeah.
because I live next to an Airbnb and I don't have any problems with them because, well, it's a very small unit. So you can only accommodate so many people, so therefore you're not gonna be bringing multiple vehicles. Now, that may not be the case for other places, which could be different, but I think it definitely needs to be a subjective matter where it's delineated by the amount of rooms would be able to provide the amount of vehicles. Something to that effect, because if you can't make a cookie cutter kind of ordinance.
One of the concerns I have, and it touches on the zoning, is, and I've spoken about this in the past, and I don't know what council's opinion is, but if I owned a house and I had young children, and I saw people going in and out of there, different people every day, and I didn't have an opportunity to get to know my neighbors, I'd be quite concerned. And so I think I talked in the past about the possibility of having a maximum frequency problem. Now, I don't know what it is, but it shouldn't be 29, it shouldn't be 30. And I don't know if has anyone else heard that? What are your thoughts?
Say that again, you had a maximum...
maximum frequency. Let's say you have an Airbnb.
Uh-huh.
If you live next door to the Airbnb and you had young children, would you want, or even forget children, but that's a good example, would you want 30 different people spending 30 separate nights?
Well, again, I live right next to one, and I haven't had an issue with that.
What's the
And maybe
frequency? That's what she's questioning.
I'm not gonna lie, it's been quite busy over the summer. I mean, I can understand that. When I first moved back to Trinidad, I was kind of nervous about the neighborhood I was moving into because it was surrounded by a lot of Section 8 housing. And it turned out I was very fortunate because they were an older demographic. I came into this with a different conception, and then after living there, I found it was a very pleasant neighborhood. So I think people can't just go into something fearful,
Well,
but
just
yet
because there's an
optimistic.
example of where it works doesn't mean there aren't 15 examples of where it doesn't work.
Correct.
Okay, my concern is that, and I'm getting at the zoning issue, which is one of the ways you handle the zoning issue is to say, no, these are not nightly rentals. And you get a little bit more stability in there. And sure, I've lived in lots of houses where I thought there was going to be a problem and there wasn't. And I also lived in a lot of houses where I didn't know there was going to be a problem and there was. So,
And that's
what we legislate to. Yeah.
Right now, could anybody with an extra bedroom hold it out for rent, call it an Airbnb?
Yeah.
And at first blush, that sounds like an innovative, kind of entrepreneurial thing, but at the same time, for all the factors, all the considerations that we have presented, parking, safety, and that kind of stuff, it seems to me taxation and so forth, they need to be regulated. And to your
Mhm.
point about
If it's easier for y'all, I can come over there.
being renting, no, seriously, I'm okay, renting such as you are. I've been a renter. When I did, I got a renter's insurance. I've also been a landlord, and I had a landlord policy for the facility. So the point is, it was a matter of consumer protection for the person with whom I had an agreement over the long term. I have 2 renters in Fort Collins now. Whereas compared to this other situation, when you're running a business, it's important that the consumer be protected for that one night that they're staying, and they're surely not gonna get a renter's policy for one night. So I think therein lies the need for regulation as a business to assure and protect that customer that there are smoke alarms, fire alarms, that kind of thing. If that makes sense.
But what do you think about the frequency test?
Yeah, I agree that's one of those
But that's to
reasons
protect the neighbors.
I understand that, but that's one of those reasons it makes it necessary for Airbnb to be somewhat, at least require a license to see if you can meet the requirements that are necessary to safely and productively conduct that kind of endeavor. If you're trying to have an Airbnb in Topeka where the street's not wide enough for one car, it gets more problematic. I would think, it seems, as I sit here talking, these are coming to me as I'm thinking, as I'm talking, maybe that's not the best way to do it, but at the same time, there are considerations that could be potential problems.
I hear something that, would Airbnb, the national organization, have rules and regulations that they see that are probably the most?
If you're a problem renter, you no longer rent.
Well, yeah, I
Do
expect.
do they have anything that maybe so that we,
Just
do
turn
they,
it
do
right
they
off.
have some that they can send to us so that we can get an understanding as what their requirements, what do they look at?
I don't know, but I would think they have to meet some,
I would think so.
prospective renters need to meet some sort of a criteria in order to be endorsed and advertised by the agency.
So we could contact them and see if they have any.
Ryan, do you?
I'm happy to help y'all with that. I
Good idea.
hope y'all know I wasn't in here to be combative. It's-
No.
And when you bring up the question, when you start talking about licensure, I really was coming from a place of curiosity and wanting to
Are
know,
you
like,
new
what
to
are
this
your...
endeavor, so you're running as well, or you're bringing previous experience?
You manage for someone else, correct?
Yeah, I manage for my partner.
Yeah.
And we've been doing it for about 6 months now. And I would, the easy part is communicating with them what the city's ordinance are for collecting taxes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's easy. We are already, they already collect and remit 4% city sales tax, 1.5% county sales tax, 2.9% Colorado sales tax on our behalf.
Right.
And they do it in other jurisdictions where they collect and remit lodging taxes or other types of taxes like that. I do know the city of Aurora has some specific licensure that they've developed for these types of rentals, short-term rentals. And I would say you might want to try to get away from calling them Airbnbs and calling them short-term rentals. It's kind of like you get into like talking about rollerblades versus inline skates kind of thing, because there are a number of groups up there. There's VRBO, there's Booking.com. I know there's a number of others that are these types of platforms that, originally the intent was to help people that had housing to be able to rent that out on a short-term basis, right? I think I might have been getting away from the question, but
No.
I guess where I want to stay is if you need help finding those resources about
Well, I
what
think that-
what they will do, and then I know Aurora has some specific they created licensure and restrictions. They might, if you have contacts there, I just happen to know they have some.
Let's go ahead and
some
leave it
work
at this,
they've done
you know
there.
what you have to do, and I think that maybe Les, if you wanna incorporate his help, get his name and phone number, and if he is willing to help, and come up with some ideas of, rather than reinvent the wheel. I don't wanna do that, the wheel's been invented out there somewhere.
But, in dealing with where they are, those kind of things, we could, in the zoning code, we could list what districts they're permitted in, and what districts they require a conditional use permit.
But does that start to get into the infringement of a personal property owner's rights?
Yeah,
Zoning
zoning
does that.
infringes on
Yeah.
personal property
That's
owners'
the point
rights
of it.
every single day of the year. Every single day.
That's why you have to live in the city to sit on that board, because it don't make sense to have someone from the county having jurisdiction over someone
I have
in
a
this
question.
industry.
Okay, let's go and get a couple more comments and we'll wind up.
Is this an appropriate time to make a comment on the proposed ordinance?
Sure.
If you go to the last page, last sentence, all short-term rental establishments shall pay all required taxes and fees required. It's kind of redundant, I mean, it's circular.
Okay.
I mean, should we spell out what those fees are?
No, because if you put them in code and they change, then you would have to change the code again. So as
Oh,
long
okay,
as,
then maybe it's just a grammatical fix or
but
something.
if you take out one of the requireds, it is better.
Yeah, that's
So
fine, as
just
long
a
as they're
cleanup.
stated
Yeah.
elsewhere. Okay.
I would get rid of the second required.
Yeah, okay, that's easy.
All right, thanks, Cheryl. Thank you, appreciate the input.
Sure.
Okay. The discussion of possible agenda items, of course, number one on the, is going to probably be the animal shelter. We're probably gonna have to have another discussion at some point down
Yeah,
there.
probably
have a more
in the
structured
very near
discussion
future.
than that.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know how this project got started and it all fell apart. I realized that there was a change, but that doesn't mean that the original agreement goes all to hell. I mean, there were a lot of people that weren't around between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and they just didn't abandon it.
Yeah. And as far as the noise ordinance, that's something that I guess Les is going to look
Yeah.
into. Our infrastructure until we can get, the information, that's something that's gonna be down the road, I'm sure, but that's information that we're gonna have to get from Mike, that he's gonna be able to produce for us for some thoughts and some long-term, ideas.
Are you ready for a new idea?
Yes.
Last night, I don't know if anybody else had occasion to watch it on 60 Minutes. It talked about ransomware.
Yeah.
Sam, did you see that?
Yeah,
It did.
I did.
Okay.
There are 23 towns, tiny towns
Little
like
towns
us
like
in
Leeds,
Texas.
Leeds someplace that you live town and they, CDOT, they got their computer systems.
Right.
Hacked?
Yeah, ransomware, they just shut them down. That was how,
It
and I think
happened
the
to me
state
in
of Colorado paid the fees.
No, they didn't.
They didn't?
Nope.
Okay, well, whatever. But the
And so
point
they
being,
lost all of their data.
well, my point or my suggestion is, at some point, we need to meet with the new IT director and find out from that individual what his plan, what he has in place and what he's going to put in place, so that we don't get, held with ransomware.
Yeah, don't think
and
it's too
require
small,
a-
it happened to me at my store. They shut my computer down.
Well,
And I
okay.
had to pay the fee,
You
it
know
was
who-
only
who's the
$75.
But but the point being is it happens in there. That's part of the reason why my wife's tired of doing IT where she works. She says, I don't like the stress of knowing that all those accounts can be hacked. She's not doing it.
I think that's something we need to bring our IT person in. and
But
have a
that
discussion.
for an agenda item is bring him in, explain, have that person, that individual explain to us the status of our IT system
Okay.
and what we needs and how we can support that, and more importantly, what his ideas are to protect us.
That probably would be something we need to do. pretty
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so,
Yeah.
but if you, and I have the link that I could send to you to the thing that's on TV if you wanna watch it, scared hell out of you.
Well, I've seen other things about the ransom and, threats and things that have happened to people, and it's scary. Anybody in council have any additional items that they would like to look for future?
After the discussion with the infrastructure and getting with the plumbing, I would like to know more about the infrastructure for the electrical system. I was aware that Mr. Brunelli was quite fluent in it, but I don't know who else all knows it as well as maybe he did. Maybe you do, Mike, but I think it would be very important for us to be aware of how this grid system works in case we have a situation like this, so our IT director is in the know as well, because if we get a hack or if we have a grid issue, we can know how our systems are all in place, because I understand it's quite complicated, even though we have like our main substations throughout town, like the one up on Woodsoppers Trail and the one east of town. But it's been something that's worried me for the past 4 years, and now that we're talking about this infrastructure, and then you bring up ransomware, it's something I think that I would like to know, or at least have the rest of our staff have a discussion about, so that way we can be in better.
And we need to have a follow-up system for developing people and so that kind of information isn't stored in Roger Bernelli's head or Jim Fernandez's head. Because when they die, or when they go away, or when they die, it's gone. And Mike is trying his best. No, he's trying his best to
He's got his hand up, he's got something to
Everybody's
say.
trying, no, but you're doing your best from what you just said.
Right.
To try and identify those places, and even if it's written on that paper, we know where to start looking.
Sure.
God forbid you should go away.
And I know we lost a lot of things in the fire, and that's unfortunate. A friend of mine was telling me how they had to do a plumbing line, and they had to call a guy out of retirement to come and say, "Oh yeah, we put this line over here on Atchison Street a long time ago." You know, and that's exactly what my point is. We're having to pull information out of someone's memory from years ago.
Okay,
So-
let's go to wind it up. Those are two items, it looks like.
Do you have something to say first, Mike? Yeah,
I just wanted to give my crews kudos because they do know the system, and when we had the line burn up, they were able to convert every switch in the city to keep everybody with power on while one circuit was down. Mr. Bernali was knowledgeable, but so is our crew.
They are?
No
Okay.
doubt, but that needs to be centrally
Sure.
located information.
Yep.
So
One-
that there's
one way
a
to-
perpetuity.
One way to do that is to develop a city GIS system, which I very much think we need to do.
I
The
thought
city
that was-
GIS system,
It's a
Yeah.
mapping and database system,
Okay.
and
Definitely.
they're not inexpensive. In fact, they can get very expensive, but you can click on any water main, and it'll tell you exactly what the size it is, how old it is, what shape it's in. But it takes a lot of maintenance, so you got to do all that kind of stuff. So, but it's amazing what you can keep track of.
well,
with your
there are
system.
so many things that we could utilize, and we need to look at what is feasible, what is best, and what's gonna help us solve our issues.
I mean, McCall, when we did the new comp plan, just what they did with the property and showing everything.
She
did.
started one.
Right, so that's the start of what you're talking about, isn't it? Yeah, so we have a start of one going, yeah.
Okay, let's go and wind the work session up. And, go on to our next item. Tom, there's nothing that's going to be voted on at the end? Okay.
So you're saying to leave? Is that what you're saying?
Get out of the booth.
Get out.
Take a break.